assisting us to be able to bring up recommendations. So just to start off, I would want us to observe particular ground rules. I would request that if you're not speaking, please switch your mic off. And if you can, particularly so that we can save the bandwidth for other people, particularly those that I know are in townships, if you could try also to switch your camera off if you're not speaking. And moreover, please utilize the chat for comments and questions. And I would also request that if we on the chat and comments, people should not be confined only to writing in English. You can write in any of the South African languages, and we'll try to pick up and maybe explain to other, or just write down what, so that other people can be able to understand. And starting off with the meeting, I would want to welcome all the presenters, Dr. Tracy Ledger, Ms. Tami Mote, Ms. Madijeng Ngaleni, and Onika Randwani, and Mr. Richard Worthington. But before we start, I would request Mr. Mpiwe Ngwenya, who's the Program Manager for Mitigation at the Presidential Climate Change Commission, to give us an opening and also the contextualization of this discussion that we're having today. And Simpiwe, I would also like you to facilitate the contribution by the three speakers, that is from Dr. Tracy Ledger, Ms. Tami Mote, and Ms. Madijeng Ngaleni. And I'll take after their presentations to facilitate a discussion and the responses that are going to come from Mr. Richard Worthington and Onika Randwani. Over to you, Simpiwe.
Okay, great. Thank you, Commissioner Magoma. As Magoma has outlined, I am Simpiwe Ngwenya, and I am a program manager within the mitigation team at the PCC. I think she's done a great job of providing an overview, as well as welcoming the speakers and program participants, as well as everyone who has really taken the time to join us in terms of embarking on this really critical and crucial discussion on energy poverty, access, and affordability. And maybe just to provide further context in terms of this particular dialogue. In the latter half of 2022, the PCC embarked on a series of dialogues in terms of understanding just the energy landscape and the various technologies, and energy security itself. But what emanated from that discussion was that in understanding the energy security and the various technologies, it's really important to also understand and delve deeper in the topic of energy poverty and what it would mean for the broader public of South Africa. And this is how this dialogue actually came about, where we had strong call from, it was mostly civil society, but as well as the other stakeholders within the PCC in terms of energy poverty and access itself, and how we can better understand this landscape, this topic in the context of a changing landscape of energy poverty, energy generation, as well as energy technologies. And what's also important to maybe just understand or consider is that the discussions from today also will feed into the broader work of the PCC, where we begin to understand and embark on work on cost-reflective tariffs and pricing in terms of energy, as well as grid studies. And this emanates from the electricity recommendations that work that the PCC presented to the president in the earlier part of this year. And one of the recommendations that were really the stakeholders really called on was an increase in allocation of free basic electricity from 50 kilowatt hours per month to 350 kilowatt hours per month. And you can then imagine that this will then have really major implications in terms of how just the national budget, National Treasury allocates its budget in terms of electricity, as well as local government. When you think about that local government, electricity is really a form of revenue generation for them. So that's, a nutshell of the energy dialogue and the contextualization for today. So to begin the discussions, we have Dr. Tracy Leger from PARI, who is also now within the JET IP project management unit, and she will provide the framing and contextualization of this particular dialogue today. So with that said, I will hand over to Dr. Tracy Leger. Thank you.
Thanks, Simpiwe. Good morning, everyone. In a short space of time, I just want to emphasize a couple of really important points. So we're all familiar with the legislation, the white paper on local government, the National Development Plan, which talks about the idea that access to basic services, electricity, water, and sanitation is a very important role of the developmental state. But I think it's very critical that we understand that these things, and electricity in particular, are not just some kind of nice to have charitable donation that the state gives people. That in fact, access to electricity is absolutely critical for us to be able to achieve all of our socio-economic development goals. So there's a lot of debate about how business and commercial enterprises need access to electricity to grow the economy, but access to electricity is just as important to even the poorest household in South Africa and even the smallest enterprise. And access to electricity is essential to us achieving almost all of our developmental goals. As just a couple of examples, the data shows that households that have got access to electricity are 3 times more likely to start their own small business than those who don't. Our own ethnographic research around South Africa shows quite clearly that when people have got access to electricity, they can grow their businesses, they can keep their businesses open for longer, they can engage in more value-added activities. In rural areas, almost every single agricultural activity, whether it's irrigation or storage or small-scale processing, requires access to electricity. There's a strong link between access to electricity and the food security status of a household and child malnutrition in particular. And I think that this is a very important issue as well. South Africa has much higher levels of food insecurity and child malnutrition than you would expect for a middle income country. More than 1 in 4 children in South Africa is so malnourished that they're classified as stunted. And this has a huge implication for the economy through the cost on the public healthcare sector, through the inability of children to learn in school. And there's a lot of data showing that there's a strong link between chronic childhood malnutrition and an increased propensity for violence in adults. So there are significant anti-development impacts of household malnutrition. Now, household malnutrition and electricity are intrinsically connected. If a household has got access to electricity, it's much easier for them to buy food in bulk and to store it, refrigeration for it. They're also able to, if they've got access to electricity, to cook in a much cleaner and safer manner than using paraffin or burning with wood or coal, which creates enormous indoor pollution. So there are all of these significant development benefits that can accrue if every household in South Africa has access to electricity. And I think it's important for us to understand that there are all sorts of other programs in the state that we are spending tens of billions of rands on every year to try and achieve the same goal. So we spend an awful lot of money in the state trying to mitigate the negative impact of household food insecurity and child malnutrition. We spend tens of billions of rands every year trying to support small business and grow rural enterprises. And access to electricity would in fact make all of these goals much easier to achieve. So if we agree that we should be aiming for universal access to electricity as a critical way of growing the economy, of reducing poverty, of reducing inequality, how do we think about access to electricity? The main way we think about it is about connection to the grid. So when South Africa reports on how well it's doing on Sustainable Development Goal 7, which is universal access to electricity, we say we're doing really well because we have an 86% household electrification rate. But a plug on the wall does not mean that the household has effective access to electricity. what we need to think about when we talk about access is the ability of a household to be able to access enough electricity in order to be able to improve their lives, in order to be able to engage in more and better economic activity, in order to be able to improve the food security status of the house. And our research has shown that the minimum amount of electricity that a household needs to access is 350 kilowatt hours per month. So if a household is connected to the grid, but they're only using about 100 kilowatt hours per month, yes, that's better than not having electricity, but you don't get the socio-economic benefits that you do when households have access to what we've called the minimum threshold level of consumption, which as I said is 350 kilowatt hours per month. The main reason why households cannot access that amount of electricity is because of the cost. It's because of their inability to pay for the electricity. If we have a look at 350 kilowatt hours, and I live in Joburg, under the new tariffs, under the lowest tariffs for prepaid electricity, and most low-income households have now been pushed onto prepaid meters, that 350 kilowatt hours a month will cost almost 800 Rand. To put that in context, 55% of South African households have a monthly income of less than 6,000 Rand a month. So for them to pay 800 Rand a month is nearly 15% of their monthly income. And they obviously have huge other demands on their income, not least of which is food, transport, and rental. 25% of South African households live below the food poverty line. They have a total monthly income of less than 3,000 Rand a month. For them to be able to pay for that electricity, that 800 Rand a month would be up to a quarter of their monthly income would be required to pay for electricity. And don't forget, these households still have to pay for water because very few of them actually get the free basic water allowance. So it's quite clear that it is almost impossible for households to afford to pay for the electricity that they need to improve their lives. And for us to then say, oh, well, you know, that's tough, you know, people are poor and they can't have it, and that's too bad, is actually incredibly short-sighted. I think we need to start thinking about electricity in the same way that we think about education. We understand that even though the benefits of education accrue to the individual, that overall, the whole of society and the whole of the economy benefits if the state invests in education and pays for education for those who cannot afford to pay for it themselves. It would be extremely short-sighted of any government to say, oh, well, if you're too poor to pay for an education, you can't have one because we don't believe in, you know, just giving people charity. We need to understand that this is a critical input into growing the economy, and so is access to electricity. And the reality is that there's this constant conflict in households between food expenditure and paying for basic services, the most important of which is electricity. So research by the Black Sash shows that childcare grant recipients regularly sacrifice food expenditure in order to pay for electricity. The main reason why they borrow money and get themselves into debt is to pay for electricity. And we need to remember that this electricity and the payment for the electricity is being made to the state, the very same state which says that it has as its most important goal reducing poverty and inequality, is directly contributing to household poverty and inequality because people cannot afford to pay for that service from the state. So this is another way in which electricity and the cost of electricity is undermining development goals. As long as we have a situation where poor households cannot get themselves out of poverty because they're too poor to pay the state for the electricity that they need to improve their lives, all we're doing is we are entrenching inequality. We are saying if you are poor, basically the way in which the electricity market works is that we are going to ensure that you stay poor. We are directly, through our electricity pricing model, contributing to child malnutrition and household food insecurity, which has devastating impacts across the economy and society, the value of which is much, much greater than a higher level of subsidized electricity. Our recommendation has been that we need to increase the free basic electricity allowance to 350 kilowatt hours. And the reason for that is that we don't believe that there is any tariff that is affordable for a poor household. If you're a household whose total monthly income is not sufficient to buy a basic basket of food, then no tariff is affordable, because every single rand that that household spends on electricity is coming out of their food budget, which is directly contributing to undermining a whole range of national development goals, which is why we say that we need to have a significant increase in free electricity. This would also have other implications. So the free basic electricity would be funded from the national fiscus. It comes to local municipalities and Eskom. In fact, poor households disproportionately get their electricity from Eskom. So in actual fact, this would be a benefit to municipalities who are struggling desperately to collect revenue from poor households. And it would also be a benefit to Eskom, which is struggling to collect revenue from poor households and which is constantly short of money. So a transfer to increase the free basic electricity is not exactly the same as a transfer to other grants, which is then a leakage from the state system. This is actually a payment from one part of the state to another part of the state. It would enable municipalities to have greater revenue. It would enable Eskom to have greater revenue. It would significantly reduce the administrative costs associated with trying to collect debt from households that can't pay, disconnect households. It would significantly reduce the incentive for illegal connections, which costs tens of billions of rands every year in damaged infrastructure and lost revenue. And it would have probably the biggest socio-economic development impact of any other intervention that the state has been doing to date to reduce poverty and inequality. Let me stop there before Simpiwe says I've overstayed my welcome.
Thank you, Tracy. You're all within your time. Thank you. I think you really raised critical points in terms of electricity itself contributing to the national development agenda and linking it to the SDGs as well as the national development plans. And you've highlighted points about the air quality impacts and how it could possibly, alleviate some pressures on local governments. With that, I think we can hand over to Ms. Tami Mote from SALGA, and she can, provide a perspective from local government. She's from SALGA, and she can take us through the views from local government. Thank you. We can't hear you, Tami. Okay, so I think the technology seems to be failing us. Am I the only one who can't hear Tami?
I can't hear her either.
I also can't hear her either.
Okay. Tami, I think we can't hear you. So maybe, I think while you try and get the audio sorted, this could maybe just give us, we can then see if the DDG of National Treasury, the DDG, Ms. Madijeng would be able to then provide a presentation for us and provide, a national treasury perspective. And Tracy has highlighted issues of the budget implications and how, increased free basic electricity could possibly, result in increased development from households. Ms. Madijeng, are you available to present for us? Thank you. And then Tami, we could then bring you in after she has presented. Thanks.
To share the presentation, is it shareable?
Yes.
Can you see it? Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. No, thank you very much, Spiwe, with this opportunity to talk on this very important issue of energy poverty. So I've got a presentation and I've got a limitation. I just saw a dentist today, so my speech may not be as perfectly as I would have loved it to be. So please don't think I'm drunk. Just the dentist. So we're gonna I'm going to provide this context. So I'm going to go through it quite rapidly to save on time. So I think the context is really what Tracy has articulated, and we really appreciate that access to energy by low-income household is important, and that failure undermines economic development. There's more that needs to be done. So on this slide, what we are reflecting is how government is providing for enabling municipalities to address this problem. So we allocate resources in the form of conditional and conditional grants that enable access in terms of electricity infrastructure and in terms of actual access to the energy itself. So equitable share, that's what it does, to enable the poor to be provided with the electricity in terms of the norm, so enabling municipalities, and conditional grants, therefore, also to provide for electricity infrastructure that creates access for the poor, and I think even towards promote renewable energy and efficiency. And revenue generation and tariff setting is important for municipality to generate their own revenue, which also can be invested to provide part of the needs. So as Tracy has said, in terms of policy, is 50 kilowatts electricity per month. And I don't think any of us can say it is enough. It is certainly not enough. Part of that, but the cost to state over the 3 years is almost 57.6 billion. And out of that, we say 10% should support maintenance of electricity to the poor. So, and this really basically shows how we calculate that cost that adds up to 123, taking account of the cost of bulk and others, and a total number of households. So we are meant to actually reaching 11.2 households, and that costs about 17 billion per year. So I guess where the problem is the extent to which even the minimum that we have actually is able to reach the poor. So we do monitor, access to electricity. And what we have also realized is that of the amount that is allocated to provide for electricity, we provide up to 50%. It's the cost that a municipality is using, and with very few households of slightly less, about 30%, that actually receive electricity. So that is the problem. So there is a leakage out of the system, even with that amount, which is an issue. So then how do we make sure that we can better target the households if this is not the case? So even though we can say it, so the powers that we have to actually enable this targeting to happen as envisaged is quite limited as National Treasury. As you will know, the unconditional transfer is a constitutional right of municipalities, and they are always very quick to enforce those rights even through the courts. So it's very difficult to be able to force, even though we can actually see that there is actually a problem, because the expectation was that as organs of state, we will all be responsible to ensure that we are doing what is right for the poor. So we see it, but there is a challenge. And through our benchmarking processes, we are able to say, municipality, you're not doing enough. So the conditional grants also, I'm just reflecting here that there is quite a bit of conditional grants that can support access, and a lot of those are targeted to the energy. And there has been now review of the grants that enable either ESCOM or municipality to actually also extend the energy access to other alternative technologies, which can actually be quite helpful also even for the households. But we are saying that for this, we need to target those that actually don't have access as a start. Obviously, down the road, you can actually begin to say, how do you enable then households to supplement this 50 kilowatts of electricity going down? So I think, obviously, as a Treasury official, I will not, it will be remiss of me not actually to give a bigger picture in terms of what government actually already spends in terms of supporting the poor, because the very same people largely that gets electricity are the same people that will be targeted most of the time with the social spending that government spend. And here we're just reflecting that for the grants, social grants and welfare, almost $1 trillion over 3 years that government is actually spending. And part of this, as Tracy has indicated, households get to use it also to support this electricity. So part of the challenge is that we, out of this, the whole total budget that government spend, almost 60% goes to social wages. So when you talk about social wage, we're talking about education, free education, health, housing access, and all other things that government does. So what this does is that, so if we want to extend to 350, which I would love to, but the issue is, what do you cut? Right? Because we are limited by how much revenue we can raise. We raise revenue from taxes. And I think in this country, we are known to be the highly taxed country in the world from a very few people that are actually paying taxes. So the issue is, when you expand, how do you finance that without also breaking the country, the fiscal system in this case? So I think the issues of trade-offs, particularly when there are also a lot of moves to say we need to have free basic income as an example. So all other things that government has to do, they have got to be funded. And I guess that is the one issue that I just to put out there in terms of the trade-offs and affordability of government without actually getting government into much bigger trouble in itself. So what I'm noting here also is that even with what we have, there are a lot of fiscal leakages. So I've already indicated that the money often is not even going to the poor. The resources are misallocated in the system, and also the losses that are coming from the loss of energy, the loss of water. All those add up to huge leakages and lack of optimization even on the municipality in terms of the revenue sources that they have. So what we are reflecting here is that a lot of this poor recovery from the revenue sources that municipalities have, which are way bigger than the provinces, that actually are implementing functions that do not lend themselves to revenue raising. So what we have seen is that even in the poor municipalities like Leguá, for instance, the people that should pay, even the businesses and the rich, have got into the habit of not paying, the culture. So much so that when we're there putting smart meters, people are saying, you can't come here and come and put smart meter so that I can pay for electricity, which I've been getting for free in all these years. So the issue of the leakage and non-optimization, where the poor, the people that should pay, should actually pay. And if we come to the conclusion that those that pay should not pay, we give everybody, then we will never be able to afford, because we have to tax. Somebody has got to pay somehow. So what we are noting here is that there are lots of leakages and mismanagement that actually local government could do better in terms of better targeting and better raising the resources in terms of the powers that they have now of revenue. And I think that is what we are wrestling with, to say, how do we support local government to maximize and optimize on their revenue sources, but on the other hand, to spend the money in the most efficient way, because that also there's a lot that can be done. So we have got programs, Municipal Financial Improvement Program that is supporting municipalities. We have got a program that is targeted Municipal Revenue Management Improvement Program that is targeted to supporting municipalities to enhance their revenue value chain in order to optimize. But all these things depends on municipalities being able to take up support and do that which is right. And I think that is where often we struggle in terms of making sure that this initiative actually can have the impact of government, state addressing these leakages that will have, that could make resources that could go a long way to supporting the developmental agenda of government. So in closing remarks, I acknowledge that access to affordable and reliable energy services is essential for inclusive economic growth and social development. And that the poor are obviously affected disproportionately in terms of the impact that they have on their socio-economic status. So, but also the resources that are available through the various instruments to invest in energy. We are making them, and I think the issue is how do we ensure that they can be best used and that the households can be best targeted to access this resource. And I think that is what we are wrestling with. So if local government it's not a conduit for better targeting households, which is what we are looking at. So what then? Because even what we have, we are not optimizing it in terms of is reaching to the households. So the efficiency and fiscal transparency and implementation of policies is quite important in actually addressing this energy poverty. And I think that is where we believe that as the state, instead of talking about more money that we actually don't have, there's a lot that we can talk about. How do we better manage what we have so that we reduce fiscal leakages and we ensure that we are better targeting the poor and that we are optimizing on the resources and the powers that the municipalities have to raise revenue. Thank you very much, Program Director. I think this is the end of my presentation.
It is. Thank you very much, TDG, for covering those really crucial points. And I think you raised crucial points in terms of the leakages within the system that then affect the allocation of free basic electricity and how it filters down, as well as the role of local government in distributing this this free basic electricity. And I think with that, thank you for taking the time to actually join us. And with that, we can then hand over to Tami Mute from SALGA. I think this would be a really great way for her to actually now provide perspectives from local government, now that we understand the critical role that local government has to play with regards to the distribution of electricity, as well as ensuring that households do receive this electricity. Tami, are you available? I don't think Tami is here, but so with that, I think that would then give us sufficient time for a really interactive session. So the one thing about the energy dialogues within the PCC is that we really encourage participation and interactiveness. And with that, I think I can hand over to Makoma and we can facilitate a Q&A. And I would also like to urge the panelists to also feel free to engage within the Q&A chat that is available. But now we can also take questions from the audience. Is Makoma available?
Apologies, yes, I'm available.
Okay,
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to the presenters. I think what you have just shared with us, it's what really takes us forward. And I would like now to open up the discussion, not really opening up the discussion as of now. I just got a message now that on this discussion we have about 148 participants, and that shows that this is a very important discussion. And out of that 148 participants, I also have noted that there's a group of women, the Women Energy and Climate Change Forum, that have joined as a group and are listening to the discussion. And I would want to give them a chance when we come to the open discussion. So what I would now recommend is to continue with the responses from Ms. Onika Rantwani and Mr. Richard Worthington. And I just hope that this would give us at least more time, at least more than the 30 minutes that we had for the discussion. And thanks very much. I would request Ms. Onika Rantwani from the Electricity Prices Department of ESCOM. She's an advisor there, just to respond to the presentations made by Ms. Madijing and Dr. Tracy. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Program Director, and good morning. I'm just taking the time. It is still morning, so good morning, ladies.
It's
and
morning.
gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yes. I just want to confirm if you can see my presentation. I'm sharing my slides.
Yes, we can. If you could make them presentation mode.
I've just done that. Thank you. Chairperson, as I said, we are grateful as ESCOM to be provided the opportunity to be part of this very important dialogue on energy poverty. And what I'll be doing is sharing with you some of the pricing perspective from an ESCOM point of view. The contents that I will cover, I'll just touch on the background, some mechanisms that we have to address energy poverty and accelerate energy access. I'll touch on the challenges that are presented by some of these mechanisms, and I will talk to the importance of cost-reflective tariff structures and the recommendations that we are making as ESCOM on this very important topic. So, Chair, I think we have heard from the previous speakers, there are various factors that contribute to the growing levels of household energy poverty in our country. Amongst those are the rising electricity prices, the high rate of unemployment, as well as inequality that is in the country. South Africa as a country, we believe that we've made enormous progress in making electricity accessible to the various communities in the country. And this is obviously done by several pro energy policies that government has introduced with the objective of enabling equal access for all to the basic energy needs. But we believe that with regards to electricity tariffs, if these are well structured, they actually play a crucial role in contributing to measures undertaken to address energy poverty and promote energy access. So what are the mechanisms currently in place? And this is not an exhaustive list, it's just to indicate what we have identified as some of the mechanisms that obviously are assisting or contributing to alleviate the energy poverty. We've got connection cost subsidies, and we believe that this is one of the excellent mechanisms that government is using to promote access to the grid, with the subsidy that we are receiving on electrification, the subsidy that on the free basic electricity, for example, and because, for example, for a basic supply of a 20 amp, there's zero connection costs. So those suppliers are able to get connected to the grid without any cost to the customer. There's also tariff subsidies, and this is cross subsidies where, for example, you've got one category of customers subsidizing another. In our ESCOM example, we've got a tariff called Home Light, which is a basic tariff, and this tariff is subsidized by the urban large customers. We also have the inclining block tariff rate, which is intended to subsidize the poor households with low consumption. But I will also talk to the challenges that we have identified with this IBT tariff. And there's obviously other incentives which with programs such as the water solar heating program that is intended to improve the livelihoods of the indigent households. Then coming to some of the challenges that are presented by some of these mechanisms that are really meant to address energy poverty, but we have identified that if these are not properly structured, they can also exacerbate the energy poverty instead of improving it. We've got an issue of, the fact that as distributors, and this is talking to both ESCOM and municipalities, not having properly unbundled and cost-reflective tariffs, and I will speak to that in the following slides. We also have identified that there isn't a national subsidy framework that guides us as distributors with principles to, which customer categories should be receiving the subsidies, and obviously to indicate that the subsidies must be targeted and be made transparent to those that are paying the subsidies. There's a challenge with the FBE allocation, as you might be aware. The colleagues are aware that ESCOM facilitates this FBE allocation on behalf of municipalities based on the list that is provided by the municipalities, the indigent list. The main challenge with this is that because this is provided obviously on this unconditional equitable grant, where municipalities can actually use the grant for other priorities. We find that in some cases, municipalities are not able to provide this allocation, and therefore this impacts the indigent households in ESCOM supplied areas. They end up not receiving their allocated free basic electricity. Then the other challenge, Chair, which I believe is one of the crucial ones, we've got the inclining block tariff structure, as I said, which was introduced by the regulator and intended obviously to subsidize the poor. But with the changing energy environment, and we've seen that customers are investing in alternative energy sources, and it's usually the affluent that are able to afford this PV installations. What happens with this is that they end up obviously moving from a high block rate, and their consumption, due to the fact that they've complemented with a PV installation, now moves to the low consumption block. And what happens then obviously is that the subsidies incorrectly are benefiting the rich instead of the intended purpose, which was for it to benefit the indigent. As obviously with the changing demographics, where we've got some indigent in multiple shared dwellings in our country, low consumption does not necessarily relate to poor customers. So just coming to the importance of cost-reflective tariffs, what is a cost-reflective tariff and how is it important to protect the poor? So what we mean by cost-reflective tariff is it simply means that the tariffs needs to be unbundled to reflect the cost structures, which means that if you've got a cost that is fixed in nature, for example, if you've got a network cost or a capacity cost that is fixed in nature, that cost has to be recovered through fixed tariff structures. And the same for variable costs, needs to be recovered through variable tariff structures. The problem if this is not done, Chair, and I will explain this using this very common phenomenon that we usually use, which is called the utility death spiral, where, as I said, we are in an energy transition. Customers are moving to alternative energy sources. And with that comes the reduction in sales. Obviously, as customers move to this other energy sources, there's reduction in sales, which means there's revenue loss for the utility. And the problem is, if the tariffs are not properly structured and unbundled, what happens is that if the fixed costs are recovered through your volumetric charges, you are now getting a reduction in the revenue that is not commensurate with the reduction in volumes. So your fixed costs obviously are getting eaten up by the fact that your volumes have reduced. The issue with this is that for the utility to obviously cater for this lost revenue, they would want to recover that by increasing tariffs. And as the utility increase tariffs, basically it means that it increases it to the rest of the remaining sales. And this means, the poor, because they do not have a choice, they cannot afford to move to renewable energy sources or energy efficient measures, they simply do not have any other choice but to be exposed to this high tariff increases. And that is why it is very crucial that we avoid those effects of the utility debt spiral and increase tariffs to the poor by properly unbundling our tariff structures. So then that leads us to the recommendations that we're making with regards to this. As I said, the tariffs need to be properly unbundled, and as Eskom, we have started that process. We have submitted the retail tariff plan, which is the restructuring of our tariffs to the regulator. And what is crucial or important to mention with this is that unbundling of tariffs does not necessarily mean that you are increasing the tariffs. If there are clear targeted cross subsidies, this actually leads to better understanding of your tariffs and transparencies in your tariff. As we said, with regards to the IBT structure, we believe that this structure of the tariff is no longer pro-poor, and it takes out the subsidy that was intended for the poor to the rich households. So we need to consider a single subsidized energy rate tariff for the poor to circumvent these challenges that are being experienced with IBT. And this is also included in the tariff restructuring plan that we have submitted to the regulator. And we also believe, in terms of the subsidy framework, that as distributors, this is both Eskom and municipalities, we don't have a national document or framework that has got clear principles to say this is a group of customers that must be targeted for subsidies, that must be subsidized. Although we have the subsidies embedded in our tariffs, as I said, with our home light basic tariff has got subsidies, but without this national subsidy framework, it's very difficult for Eskom and municipalities also to be able to also supply this subsidies properly because of this lack of framework. So we believe that we need this framework at a national level and not let each distributor do what they want in terms of the allocation of subsidies. And then lastly, in terms of the review of policies, the other colleague has spoken to the review of the current FBE allocation. We also believe that it is not sufficient, and Eskom has actually developed a proposal, a concept, proof of concept for consideration that this FBE be increased. We said from 50 to 100, but I had my other colleagues saying to 350, which is better. And with the other challenge that is experienced by Eskom in facilitating these allocations on behalf of municipalities, we are also engaging with government to consider ring-fencing those costs for allocation to customers in Eskom supplied areas, similar to what we are currently doing with the electrification subsidy, where Eskom gets the subsidy directly and do electrification in our areas of supply. So just in conclusion, Chairperson, Eskom continues to support mechanisms that are meant to address energy poverty. As I said, from a pricing perspective, it's crucial that tariffs are restructured to reflect the evolving electricity industry. But having said that, in pursuant to those cost-reflective tariff structures, as distributors, we have this difficult challenge of balancing, between cost reflectivity and customer retention. So whenever we do a tariff design or we restructure a tariff, we need to consider the impact that this has on customers. And therefore, we understand that some of the changes might need to be phased in to accommodate this. And obviously, we do not want to drive the customer completely off grid by going fully cost reflective. So in conclusion, Chair, energy poverty, we understand that it's a very important subject. It cannot be resolved by any single entity, but requires a collective effort from all spheres of government as well as civil society. that we unite, and obviously with the objective of improving universal access to a safe, reliable, and most importantly, affordable electricity to all South African citizens, including the indigent. And we are grateful for the opportunity and the dialogue that has been facilitated by the PCC. We believe it's a very important platform for us to share knowledge with the industry stakeholders on this very important topic. Thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Rantwani. I think your closing remarks are exactly why we have these discussions, so that we can be able to share information, make each other aware of the dynamics and also the challenges and opportunities. And that's exactly why we're having this. And thank you very much for coming through and sharing with us. But before I could give to Mr. Richard Worthington, we do have some comments and questions on both the chat, the Q&A, and also the chat. And I would like to invite the previous speakers just to glance through the comments that have been put forth, and also for Dr. Tracy to respond directly to a question that has been put through by Anonymous. So I'll start with Dr. Tracy, and then after Dr. Tracy, then come to Mitigation, if you would want to respond to any of the comments that I've put on the chat or on the Q&A. And after that, then we'll go to Mr. Richard Worthington. And also, I see some questions to you, Ms. Rantwani, also. If you could check the chat box or the Q&A, I'm not sure where the comments have been submitted. And then we can go to the next presenter as a response. Thank you. Dr. Tracy?
Okay, thanks. So what I'm going to do, what I'll put in the Q&A is I'll put a link now to a book that we've written on the subject, and that's got all the data in it and all the links to the data that you can find, which is National Treasury data and Stats SA data. And if I can just make a couple of other comments, can I, Simpiwe, on some of the other questions?
You're most welcome.
Yeah, so I think, you know, this issue about, you know, the role of the municipality is that, as Mitigation has pointed out, you know, not even 25% of the households that are funded for the free basic services in the national budget are actually getting those services. And the situation with water is almost as bad as it is with electricity. And the main reason for that is that municipalities are making it as difficult as possible for households to register on the indigent register. So certainly I do agree with National Treasury that we need to improve the implementation of the free basic services before we start thinking about increasing them. We need to ensure that the funding that we do have in the budget for the free basic services is actually reaching households. So now I'm going to propose something which is probably slightly contentious, and before people from local governments and Treasury are hopping up and down. I think it's important to point out that probably about 60% of all poor households, if not slightly more, get their electricity from Eskom, not from their local municipality. And that's because of the historical township electrification program by Eskom. But Eskom has no role to play in the free basic electricity program because the indigent program is run by municipalities. So what happens is that a municipality is supposed to tell Eskom how many households get the electricity from Eskom are registered as indigents and then pay the money over to Eskom. But that's not what they do, because Eskom should be supplying about 5 million households and they're only supplying about 800,000 households. And I think there's a good case to be made for diverting that part of the equitable share that would end up at Eskom anyway directly to Eskom, and let Eskom register those indigent households. And before everyone starts hopping up and down and saying we can't do that with the equitable share, I think it's important to remember that we have done that with the equitable share in the past, notably when municipalities weren't paying Eskom. And also, you know, I think there's a good case to be made for not paying the equitable share to municipalities for services that they are not actually providing because the households are not linked to them. But let me stop there and I'll post the link.
Thank you very much. I would like to check if Ms. Mitigation would you want to respond to some of the comments or the questions that have been put through to you?
No, thank you very much. So clearly, I think observing, I don't know what is going on here. Let me see. Okay, yeah. So observing that the electricity and the free basic services in general, we are not able to target them in the way that we would like with the current dispensation. So I do think that the thinking about how to better target is something that we need to engage with, because we will be looking at getting better value for money. And that would be quite a big point of discussion and engagement and policy change down the line, given the powers and functions that municipalities have, particularly even with regard to this utility functions, reticulation. So I think there was one comment that says these RDP houses should have a solar. So I do believe that that's something that could be considered if it's not yet part of what happens, because the solar has got potential to at least supplement. That's the way I look at it, because I don't think if municipality is the household is on solar, that then it should be removed from free basic service, because even solar itself has got limitations in terms of how far you can get in terms of electricity. So I do think that's something to be considered, because at the moment, and I guess it's quite would be possible given now the direction, as I talked about, the reform with regard to the energy grants that allows for implementing or putting other alternative energy in non-grid solutions to households. So it's just that at the moment, we are focusing that on the households that don't have access at all. So those that already have access in terms of who are able to get 50 kilowatts are not necessarily the ones targeted in terms of the reticulation program that is being run by ESCOM and DMRE. But I think through that and linked with a housing program, I think the linkage can be made whereby part of the houses could already have some degree of solar in it. Yeah, no, I think that's so. And I like this other comment that says that municipalities must be managed like a business. I really believe that, because, and I think that is why we have, allowed them to, in a way, the salary level that I said is really about enabling them to attract the best in order for them to be able to run the business. And I think that's something that we haven't inculcated in the system, for them to realize that you are actually in the business of selling services. Of course, there are poor that needs to be assisted, but how are you managing the services that you are actually selling in terms of the costing and the collection, the billing and the collection? And I think that's something that a lot needs to be done for us to be able to crack that, because it's very weak in the current system. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I've noted two questions on the Q&A, but before we do that, earlier on we had a technical glitch with Tammy for her presentation. I think the glitch has been fixed, and I would like to give you an opportunity to do your presentation, and I would really want us to have like a discussion. I realize that sometimes people are saying we have less time for discussion. So if we could maybe just go direct to the points that we'd want to emphasize. But you can go to your presentation if you want to, the one that you had on, that you wanted to share with. Thanks.
Tammy, we
can't hear you. I'm not sure if other people can hear you.
Oh dear. There seems to be a problem with the sound on the other end from Tammy. Yeah, I think Yeah, let's continue. So there's a hand online from Natalie. I think we can take that hand, and maybe just
Please
also
do.
when we Natalie will then come in, and there's a couple of hands coming up. So maybe just when we think about, you know, electricity access, and we think about the changing landscape of energy generation and provision itself, I mean, I think it's really important to consider the more decentralized means of energy provision to households, especially when you think of those households that don't have energy as it stands. You know, how do we then also think about reaching out to those households as well? And yeah, Natalie, are you available to talk? Oh dear. Okay.
Is
So
she unable to talk, Natalie?
Natalie has her hand up. Yeah, so she can come in now. And so I saw in the chat there was also maybe another comment about just you know, in this discussion of energy access, poverty and affordability, there was a question of socially produced energy forms. I don't know if that would be a question that the DDG or Tracy or you know, would like to probably answer, because I do think that it touches on budget and restructuring within the government system itself, while we wait for the hand.
Can I jump in there, Simpiwe?
Yes,
So,
please.
I mean, this, you know, I think that there's two parts to this discussion that we need to have. So there's this issue about rolling out solar to households and community ownership of assets, and then the free basic electricity. And I think in many ways these are sometimes very different discussions. So community ownership and who owns new generation capacity is one kind of discussion. The issue around solar for low-income households is quite a hot debate at the moment. And I think it's important for us to differentiate between the 15% of households that are not connected to the grid, and the kind of 86% of households that are connected to the grid. So if we say 55% of South African households live in poverty, we can say that there are 40% of households live in poverty and are already connected to the grid. My assessment would be that if you look at those households, with the majority of poor households who are already connected to the grid, the most sensible, cost-effective, best solution for the households themselves is a grid-based solution. You know, we can't say we can't afford to give households free electricity, but we can afford to put a solar system on each house. I mean, these systems by definition will be small. You know, there's the real chance that we're just going to trap these households in poverty forever. Who's going to pay to insure the systems? Who's going to pay to maintain them? To my mind, it is much more effective and better for everyone involved that if a household is connected to the grid, that they have a grid-based solution. And the grid-based solution is to get their power from the grid, but to do it in a way that is affordable and access, and have that as a different discussion from how do we get power to other households who are not connected to the grid. And the vast majority of households that are not connected to the grid are quite clear that what they want in the long run is to be connected to the grid, not some kind of interim solar solution. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Tracy. Natalie, you should be able to speak now. Can you talk? There seems to be a technical glitch with regards to having our participants speaking. Tammy, I see you are unmuted. Are you able to come into the conversation now? Okay. Yes, we can hear you. No.
Can I speak?
Yes.
It's Kashifa.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So I think thank you for the presentation. It's very useful for us as communities. So we are working in communities. I'm Kashifa from Housing Assembly. And, you know, we will touch on the poor community that's not getting the free basic electricity. Now, we've seen also in communities, you know, you have this big households where it's not considered, because you can't just use the 350 because you have a huge household. So obviously you will be using more electricity. So people are not considered when you buy electricity. Now the free basic electricity gets taken away because you are buying more, but you don't consider the volume of people that's living in the house. And also the charges on electricity is very huge. So when we buy electricity, the extra charges that, especially in Cape Town, that we are paying towards our electricity, it's also a contributor to us not having enough electricity. And then also the elderly that we are having in our communities, you know, I don't know how you guys will be able to fix this also, because when people are buying electricity, also the charges have been like some to owe the municipality. So those things are also taken from the electricity. And I think it's the elders that is mostly affected by this, because when you buy 10 Rand, 5 Rand get deducted, and then you just get 4 and something units, and that is 1.4 unit that people are getting. So that is a huge challenge within our community. And then also we have in the rural areas where water is contaminated, and now you have to use boiling water. So you have to use now extra electricity also now to clear the water. So nobody is contributing to the factor that these people are using now water, these contaminated water, so they have to buy extra units for electricity. And people have challenges, especially on the farms where farmers are now dangling the carrot in front of communities. You will use just this amount of units because of the shortage of electricity and all those type of things that's happening on the farm. So those are the challenges that our community has. But I think the free electricity really needs to be looked in our poor communities, because most of the households it's struggling, and if we have solar panels, at least that will alleviate some of the burden for our poor communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's well noted. There's another hand from the Andile had his hand up. I'm not sure if he would like to speak. Natalie still has her hand up, but hello. Okay, so
I'm available should you wish that I come in at your liberty. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Tammy. I think this would be a good time for you to come in. Go ahead. Tammy is from local government. She's an energy, she's from Salga. She's an energy technical advisor from Salga, and she will provide some perspectives from local government.
Thank you very much, and I'm very sorry about the glitches earlier on. I just need to indicate that Salga has conducted numerous studies regarding the energy poverty. And I want to appreciate the colleagues from National Treasury, Tracy from Perry and ESCOM. I think it is important, colleagues, that as we look holistically in what the country is forging ahead, we should also take into consideration that the free basic services that are currently being offered by government, they came in place in 2001, and that cannot be undermined because it did relieve most of the poor. We can as well take forward the discussion through the PCC to trigger what are the challenges. I'm also happy that after all the glitches that I've had, maybe it is an opportune time to acknowledge the challenges that the poor South Africans are facing. We should also go beyond and say who is the sector that has got a direct interaction with the communities. And these are our municipalities. From Salga's perspective, we have enjoyed many support from various partners. We have made many efforts in gathering quantitative and qualitative evidence-based information to look at how do we, as Salga, support the municipalities in the NDP of the country. And when we look at the issues of energy poverty, with all the fiscal needs and also the constraints that the country has, we must always continue to acknowledge that our people are living in dire poverty. SALGA continues to invest its time and efforts to ensure that in all the mechanisms that are used and various financial instruments that government is proposing in ensuring the kilowatt of 50 per hour are increased. We cannot take it for granted that the 50 kilowatt an hour has long passed, based on the needs of the country, based on the poverty levels, and notwithstanding the fact that there are demographic changes that are impacting the municipality severely. The indigent register on its own, with all its challenges, as a base for municipalities to conduct an inclusive and conclusive approach to see how many community members or the municipal community are suffering. That register on its own, we acknowledge as SALGA that it is not reaching the maximum of people who are living in dire poverty. Even the allocation of 50 kilowatt an hour, we will acknowledge that for the past close to 20 years, it cannot be correct. And we cannot also, as government and state-owned organization or entities at a broader level, appreciate and sit back and say it's enough. We know how the tariff designs have changed over the years. We have had an opportunity from Eskom right now outlining exactly the complexity of what is actually happening in the space. It is therefore very important that through the dialogue of the PCC, we come very clear to say we understand the financial limits. We understand the roles of the municipalities in its own totality as legislated by various frameworks and the policy directives. We acknowledge as well as SALGA that there's multiple grants that are targeting municipalities in ensuring that the business models of the municipalities are geared towards sustainability and are responsive to the needs of the community. But we find ourselves in the state through the interactions that we have had with National Treasury and PERI. When we're sitting around the table, including Eskom, we have as a country a responsibility to look beyond what is legislated. Maybe it is an opportune time through the PCC to actually also look in depth based on the dialogues that they've conducted, the engagements that they've done with all spheres of government, including the civil society, to say we've got the challenges. How do we then improve the lives of our people? The studies have been conducted by SALGA, which will be shared with all relevant parties. But I should also come forth and say, through the research and development leg of SALGA, we have representatives from National Treasury, where we are trying to iron out all these challenges that are relating to local government equitable shares. And we understand that the National Treasury itself, it works within a defined medium-term budget frameworks. And with the constraints that we have as a country, how do we help our people? So the findings have been tabled, engagements are continuously happening, and we are pleased with the current opportunity that the PCC has gone out to hear all relevant parties in how do we improve the energy access of our people. I should indicate as well that we've got effectual information that comes from National Treasury and the States SA, and information that is actually highlighting the beneficiaries of the free basic services. And in our own right as South Africans, we can sit back and maybe take a moment and take a cap away of coming from certain departments or organization. And we influence the policies in such a way that we take a back seat and realize the poverty constraints, and we look at how the energy poverty inequality can be addressed in this, for the interest of ensuring that we promote the socio-economic development of this country. And I appreciate the platform precisely because all the relevant parties that have got a key impact in the space of energy are able to have this dialogue. We are faced with power reform.
Sure.
We are faced with the power reforms, which we really need to take into consideration, precisely because we have to respond to the national determination contribution. And South African local government have to come to the party. There are recommendations that SALGA is currently communicating with municipalities on how best can they look at the indigent register. And also, we will be very aware that the number of the population against unemployment registered by the Stats SA, it cannot be as accurate, because in terms of the allocations of this 50 kilowatt an hour, you'll find that it's based on a household. Moreover, in this household, you'll find that there are multiple users. So it is in this platform that we wish to have a pure dialogue that is going to be developmental and assist in unlocking and also leveraging the very same grants through the Department of Mineral Resources and so forth. We advocate as well at SALGA that the renewable energy solutions should also be tapped in the stream of the country that is in dire energy security instability. For now, Spiwa, I think I will wait for any comments, but thank you very much once more for this opportunity. And I hope through the PCC we'll have a meeting point on how do we address the energy poverty and help the South Africans to have the livelihoods through electricity and energy stream. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tammy. That was really powerful. And I think you raise important points in terms of looking beyond what is legislated to contribute towards, I guess, socio-economic development. And if I may, pose back this question to you: how do we do that? I think an important part of this discussion I've just realized is that really to the core of energy access, poverty, and just ensuring energy security, there's a huge issue of just development as a country. And so that people can be able to afford energy so that they can develop. So it's actually almost like a cycle. It's a cycle. So, I mean, it's just a reflection that I had. And I don't know if you'd like to respond to that, but we've also we need to take in Richard Worthington, who is a civil society officer, and he's going to provide just a brief presentation, and there should be sufficient time for us to continue to engage the hands. Mthunzi Luthuli, I see your hand, and if I may, I think we can take Richard Worthington's comments or quick presentation, and then we can get back to the really, really interesting discussion.
So, Cynthia, can you see my hand?
Is that you, Richard?
No, this is me. Thank you. I'm sharing my screen, if that's okay. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm not sure who else had their hand up.
It's Mthunzi Luthuli who has his hand raised.
Okay, may I request that Richard continues with the presentation, and then after the presentation, the first to respond would have Andile Mlambo and Mthunzi Luthuli. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicola. So I'll pitch straight in. And I'd ask for people's tolerance. There's more material in this presentation than I'm going to cover in speaking to it, but I wanted to put a lot of stuff on record. So the presentation will be available to everyone else afterwards. Please don't be alarmed if there's stuff that you can't follow when I go through the initial slides quite quickly. you can always come back to them. But yeah, in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on some things. The reason that the Project 90 by 2030 logo isn't on here is that it's not their presentation, it's mine, but that is my most relevant affiliation for doing this. And I am guided by the 4 questions that were circulated in advance of the dialogue, which are on the bottom of the slide here. They're all of the state barriers, electricity and energy security, and cost-effective tariffs. I'll come to those after some introductory slides, if I can just figure out how to turn the page on my presentation. Can you see it okay?
Your page is not turning.
Pardon? No, it's not turning, but you can see the page. Okay, now I have to figure out how to turn the page. Sorry, right, I managed to do it somehow. Just to note that we're working on a mandate back from 1998 that has still not been fully implemented, including recognition back then that energy policy has given virtually no consideration to women's needs in the context of basic services, something that we are still working on, I believe. Also in the context of the National Energy Act, which is a legally obliges the minister to provide for, and it's got a nice focus on energy services, not just access. That's one of the things that was an improvement over the policy of 98, is to focus more on services, and also that the Act has to, that the measures of the minister have to take into account a commitment to free basic electricity. So it's not just a policy, it's also a legal requirement. And but quick look at the department's Mineral Resources and Energy's website. If you go to the list of topics and you see electricity, you will see free basic electricity features there as the subject supposedly covered. But if you go to a topic, it's not actually covered, not in this or other sections of the website. So, you know, we have a disconnect between what the lead agent is actually doing versus the policy and legal requirements. The only mention of FBE in the website is under some really old frequently asked questions, which are really not helpful in this regard. So we really do need the lead agent to be taking more responsibility in this context. So the premise coming from civil society, and now, sorry, I've got to move things around on my screen so that I can see what I'm doing. But basically, the premise is that access to basic energy services is an essential right, and as Tracy Ledger has laid out in good detail, effective provision of a free basic electricity service is the most direct and cost-effective opportunity for reducing poverty and marginalization in South Africa at scale. While load shedding has focused a bit of attention on the value of electricity at point of use, we still haven't seen official attempts to quantify this. And in fact, the work of Harry, the Hungry for Electricity publication is, as far as I'm aware, the best available attempt to start looking at the value of electricity, so not just obsessed with costs. Just to note that energy democracy is not all about electricity. So we also have a free basic alternative energy policy, but it has not yielded much to date. So drawing on the TIPS policy brief of number 5 of 21, they give an account of what is being done on the free basic electricity based on Stats SA numbers from 2018. Apparently a total of 233,000 households and 100 are benefiting from alternative energy provision across 49 municipalities. So this is another area that really deserves considerable attention. Anecdotally, I've heard that there's now work looking into provision of LPG in the Western Cape, at least. This is something that wasn't registered in the 2018 stats, but given the urgency of addressing indoor air pollution, lack of access to services, the problems associated, which come with some of these alternative services as well, of risk of fire and that kind of thing, didn't want to neglect the importance of alternative energy services, but I'm going to focus more on electricity. Just to note that integrated energy centers, which were introduced under Minister Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka around about the turn of the century, was one of the key programs that was supposed to address energy access, provide a one-stop energy shop, provide solutions for communities. There was a really inspiring intent behind that, but it seems to have diminished significantly. There's nothing on the website of the DMRE about it. There is some stuff to be found on the internet, including the launch of a center back in 2019 and another one in 2020. And I want to quote something here because it speaks to when I come to the barriers and the attitudes that, you know, when they opened the 16 million Tembisile Hani Integrated Energy Center, it consists of diesel and petrol tanks, so it's a provision for liquid fuels and has other features that include an express store and training center with computers, but there's no mention of anything around renewable energy, which at the time of the launch of these centers was supposed to be a major focus, making renewable energy technologies available to communities. And at the latest launch of one of these centers, our minister said that a commercial entity in a community is beneficial, though the service it provides, through the service it provides 9 people permanent employment. Importantly, it is owned by a cooperative, all good stuff. Then coming to conflicts of issues between the cooperative members and problems that led to long delays in implementing and opening this center, Minister tells us conflict is a result of ignorance. If people have no information, they do not understand what is coming their way. They will fight all the time because they see money and think they must squander it immediately. The starting point is to train them to run the center. They will appreciate the industry. The industry is an interesting developmental sector. It is a clear value chain in which people can participate. All fair enough. But this is not really what the Integrated Energy Centers program was established to do. So what was a co-benefit, promoting rural enterprise development, has become the primary objective, and we seem to have lost sight of bringing information to communities, empowering people to understand energy service options, the different supply options, including the potential of renewable energy. So this is another area which really would benefit from more attention. On the issue of combining the rollout of rooftop solar with eliminating energy poverty, which has come up in the chat and also in some of the other inputs, it's something that I've been advocating for a long time, but we have a weak track record in South Africa, and it is not something we can put in the way of getting free basic electricity to poor households, with children being stunted on a daily basis, with education outcomes being impacted. So I do think it's important to recognize that opportunities for achieving economies of scale and creating manufacturing demand for solar PV have been neglected. There have been various programs proposed in this regard and simply ignored. So this remains an aspiration. Don't have time to go into the potential for it, but is worth noting that the Renewable Energy Finance and Subsidy Office that was established within the Department of Energy was something of a failure and possibly only ever a tokenistic effort. And we also don't really have a clear understanding of what happened with the household energy strategy. It was superficially updated in 2018. The target was only 30,000 solar home systems per annum. What's happening with that, it would be good to know. But moving on. The draft South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, some of us were hoping that that would help to address this issue of combining the massive rollout of PV with access. Rather disappointing in this regard. Some worthwhile aspirations for things that will happen in future, but at the moment, yeah, we're going to have to focus on addressing that in its own right. It's an industrialization strategy that seems to have very little time for considering how the various advantages of renewables for decentralization, lowering costs, etc., can add to addressing energy poverty. And sorry, it keeps getting difficult to turn the page, but For context, there's a few figures here on how money is being allocated. So Treasury has allocated, and this is from a report by IISD that I'm sorry I haven't included the reference, but I will send that around. So for FBE in the financial year 2019-20, it was 10.6 billion, following year 11.6 billion. In those years, the provision for Eskom restructuring, or what most of us call bailouts, were 49 billion and then 56 billion. So we mustn't be scared of big numbers. Tax avoided through exemption of electricity from the carbon tax, 24.7 billion in 1920 and 44.6 billion the following year. That was somewhat offset by the electricity levy, which is invoked as a reason for giving Eskom exemption from the carbon tax. But that, for 2019-20, the only figure I could find, 8.1 billion. Also, as Dr. Ledger has pointed out, funds allocated for FBE are recycled into the electricity system. So it's not like we're just throwing money off into the void there for the poor. This is money that is used to pay for our electricity system, if it is implemented correctly. And yes, there are serious problems with that, as have been highlighted. So the whole question of affordability is really highly subjective. I would take issue with Treasury's view that we are a highly taxed country, but relative to America, maybe so. Relative to many other countries in our circumstances, not so. So that needs to be interrogated. I've also heard governments say that they're not practicing austerity. Again, a highly subjective issue, but decisions on how money is spent should be based on their full socio-economic benefits, the value of these allocations, and that doesn't seem to be happening at the moment. Coming to the 4 questions that were posed at the beginning, the role of the state, well, I think civil society is united, feeling that financing for the provision of basic energy services is a national responsibility, as well as capacity development, coordination, and oversight, and not just Treasury or DMRE, but other departments. Also responsible for policy coherence, so ensuring that we have a holistic assessment of the social value of energy services in our immediate context, and national needs to align policies with our and practices with our other development goals. At the local level, well, that's where implementation has to happen, should be informed by participatory local integrated development planning. And we need local government to be responsible for the operation and or oversight if they don't have sufficient capacity at that stage, including billing and metering and oversight of the introduction of competitive markets. Provincial, it's not so clear to me. They have subnational strategies. They certainly can help to foster cooperation amongst local authorities, but not too clear how much help having another layer is there. Ensuring provision of free basic electricity is a shared responsibility, but it does require national standardized oversight and support. I think Treasury have made this point, Tracy, others have made the point, Salga too, very much so. And particularly, we have a lot of obsession with supply, but metering and billing is often outsourced. At the moment, it's not clear that local government is able to exercise responsibility for FBE under these arrangements, and for them to do so, we also need facilitated access to information, perhaps more at a national level, so that one can get oversight. And one has to wonder what the role of SANEDI is, the South African National Energy Development Institute, which was seen in the National Energy Act as playing a key role in these issues. In fact, they were looking at something called a Working for Energy program, which would combine a public works approach with addressing energy poverty and getting communities participating in initiatives to gain access to energy. That didn't seem to go anywhere, but it's something that would be a pity if it were totally buried. Barriers. Well, a lot of it is in attitudes, the belief that free basic services will create dependency, as though there isn't dependency on the state of the majority of our population anyway. Somehow now we're going to create dependency, which speaks to a neoliberal paradigm and deference to capital in the financial sector. Also paternalism, and that's why I quoted Montash from the launch of an integrated energy center, because I think those observations around enterprise support are all very well, but there's way too much instrumentalization of our people by our government. Part of this paternalistic attitude where people will learn to appreciate the value of this business comes from the liberalization and market fundamentalism attitude, regardless of the constitution. And this has led us to an ahistorical approach to the poor and the status quo in South Africa. There's also challenges due to a lack of integrated energy planning, which should be happening from the demand side, looking at energy service needs. These really don't feature enough in our planning. And also a generational procurement focus in integrated resource planning for electricity supply. I think it's widely recognized as a challenge with capacity in government, both national and local, and this is exacerbated by a lack of clear definition of respective duties, responsibilities, and accountability. And of course, corruption has also not been helpful. And along with these barriers is an appetite for mega projects, for things with geopolitical profile, and for government having arbitrage over big procurement, which has totally sidelined the more challenging from an administrative point of view, perhaps, but more promising from an energy democracy point of view, opportunities that could be happening on the ground. Electricity security, this one question is a bit strange. It invokes electricity security. If it is existing, it would be greatly enhanced by full appreciation of the system value of all components of the electricity system and the various attributes of supply side and demand side options. This is about moving beyond the old idea that large baseload plants are going to give us reliable electricity supply. If that hasn't been debunked by now, you'll never let go of that belief. And you have to look at Kuberg lately. So it's conducive for, but it's not a mechanism to address inequality. Local energy security is as important as national energy security, and not just a national objective. And we shouldn't ignore the potential of a regional dimension. And decentralization of the electricity system, seen as a challenge by some, is actually a strength rather than a weakness. It helps to make our system anti-fragile. So electricity security is best achieved across a large integrated system. Systems that grow capacity of local government and communities, that was in the question. These are necessary, particularly in decentralizing and multi-directional grid, but it requires the engagement of households, and not households simply as consumers or prosumers, but under a framing of energy democracy and consistent with constitutional provisions for local integrated development plan. And then much more work on public education, supported by frank, inclusive, and detailed communication by the state, by government departments, not self-promotion of the departments, but frank communication. That's essential for sustainable eradication of energy poverty and true empowerment of people. Finally, this issue of cost-reflective tariffs. Well, Eskom have said it's really just about unbundling the tariffs. If that's what you're doing, use the word unbundling, please, because cost-reflective tariffs is too open to interpretation and manipulation, and it should be informed by full cost-benefit analysis, but currently it's premised on externalization of social and environmental costs. So we're talking about the costs to investors largely. As an electricity pricing policy, it reflects deference to the financial sector, putting profit before people without consideration of the value of electricity in households. Recovering the cost of supply from electricity users as a whole is conducive to energy security, but it's not a necessary condition, and it's not sufficient to ensure it. In some contexts, it may in fact be a barrier to eliminating energy poverty, particularly if it is applied simplistically. This is not to argue against an unbundling of tariffs, but if that is to be done, it needs to be done in a way that doesn't inhibit our commitment to eliminating energy poverty. So electricity systems not premised on concentrated fossil fuels will benefit from national and regional integration, and the term cost reflective really requires more specificity. To close, I would like to just finish with a consideration of the importance of addressing energy poverty in the context of a just transition, because it's not just about energy poverty in and of itself, but it's about long-term sustainability within the necessity of shifting our development pathway consistent with our nationally determined contribution, a just transition framework put out by the PCC, etc. So not only is it fundamental to social justice, but it's also a potential platform or avenue for developing solidarity and cooperation, shifting our development pathway. And Professor Winkler has given a very academic substantiation of this. The reference is there. I'm not going to quote it at length, but I do think when addressing energy poverty under the auspices of PCC, which seems to be our greatest potential champion here, we need to recognize that the broader challenge of a just transition requires coalitions of change agents, and therefore bringing people on board to the just transition narrative by putting eliminating energy poverty at the center of it is good for everybody. Eliminating energy poverty is not just the right thing to do for the poor majority of our population. It is also good for social stability. It makes for a better life for all. Let's do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard, and highlighting that energy access is actually a human rights issue. So we've had, Andile did have his hand up, and I think this is the right time for me to actually take questions from Andile Mlambo and Hlati Madela. They've had their hands up for quite a while now. We have also just a couple of other hands that have been raised. Andile, would you still like to pose your question? Okay. Hlati Madela. You may speak.
Simpiwe, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Let me greet all of you. I represent an organization called Economic Intervention Forum of South Africa. We were founded on the 28th and 29th of January this year. It was in response to the lies that were spread around load shedding and all the misrepresentation of information that goes with it. I am 51 years old, and I'm going to ask you, Simpiwe. And first of all, I want to appreciate the lady from SALGA, and I want to say to her, through our CEO, Mthunzi Luthuli, and myself as a chairperson of Economic Intervention of South Africa, we urge SALGA to please be in contact with us so that we can demonstrate that the opportunity for electricity and energy presents a huge opportunity for revenue for the municipalities. It's actually the other way around. But because the people have decided to create it as a bad situation or a situation that disadvantages the municipalities, we want to open up the government eyes to say it's an incredible opportunity that puts the municipalities in charge to be able to generate their own revenues, but also to partner properly with ESCOM. We raise our hands to SALGA. Please be in contact with either myself or Mthunzi Luthuli. Simpiwe, in closing, let me say these people so that we can put things in context. We come from the apartheid past, where we are told that the first bunch of engineers and the people who were allowed to then tap into these types of technical feeds happened in the 1980s. We are told that exactly around 1985, there was a first batch of African people graduating as engineers. Here today in 2023, we are sitting with a president of the Republic that is in the office, voted by the African electorate, surrounded by white males who are misleading the president, who co-opt a few black faces, who we know that they are not going to challenge all of these things. The reason why I speak like this, Simpiwe, we have a problem. if we don't stop this, we're going to be tenants in our own country, because it's going to be the private sector that provides electricity for our municipalities and for our people, when in fact, we can demonstrate that municipalities together with ESCOM, they're going to print money compared to these renewable energy IPPs. Because as we speak here today, ESCOM remains the cheapest electricity producer in the country, but it baffles us. Why are the municipalities continuing subjecting themselves to power purchase agreement where they are not part of the shareholding? I don't want to hog the mark, Simpio. I just want to say to you in closing, it's not fair for us to sit with our children and say to them, old men who are white, they're surrounding our president, we have nothing to say. We are going to go straight to our grave, not having contributed to this country. Give us a chance. Give the people that graduated at the dawn of democracy. I was stuck at the university in 1994, 1996. There is brilliant young people who graduated now in the 2000s. Move over, let the electorate and the young people of this country who are Black pronounce on this energy trajectory, and let the president run with what is informed by the electorate, which is majority Black people. That is my comment, Simpiwa. We raise our hands to Salga, we raise our hands to the president. This Presidential Climate Change Committee, it is called different names in America, in Europe. In Europe, they call it a green taxonomy. It includes technologies that have been deliberately removed here in South Africa. In the US, it includes technologies that have been demonized in this country.
Yeah.
Germany, it is now incorporating technologies that continue to be demonized in this country. And very lastly, I want the Climate Change Presidential Committee to tell us how much of these renewable energy, wind and solar, are going to be reserved for the municipalities and the people in their jurisdiction to go and attract whoever wants to fund them for the benefit of those people in those jurisdictions on terms and conditions of the people of that district, of the people of that local municipality, and of the reflection of the electorate of this country. That is our comment. We raise our hands. We are available as Intervention Forum of South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Hlati. Thank you. I think that is well noted. So just looking at the time, I would like to give, there was another hand by Andile. He's had his hand up, and I think Andile might speak. I see there's several questions, but I think this would also just be a good time for me to probably hand over to Dr. Crispian Olva, who's the ED of the PCC, and he might have some words as well. I think Andile, if you may speak.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Andy Namnamo. First, I want to thank Richard for the presentation, because he had touched on something that I wanted to ask even previously on his presentation regarding the fallacy about saying if you give free basic electricity, you are creating a dependency state. So with us I come from Tembisa. So with us, they cancel the free basic electricity using aggregates to say, this is the new Black middle class, I assume, based on things like maybe social media. I don't know what informed them to think that we are an equal society, all of us can afford. So they did cancel it, which for me, it was a fallacy, it was a gross one at that. So because of time, I'd like to ask, my question was on the role of ESCOM on the yearly price determination, to ask, do they have an exclusive role? Is there, I think Simpiwe, you touched on policy earlier on, that is there a policy framework around it to say, this is how the yearly price determinations are done? Is there a committee that sits down and discusses it based on what's happening, based on a consumer price index, and based on the cost of living? Because it's very important for us to consider all this in coming together when ESCOM comes and says, look, we are increasing prices. And I've felt and I've seen and I've witnessed that all the time, there's people from marginalized communities are being excluded. And so my question would be that, is there a policy, is there a committee that sits down, or is just ESCOM alone who decides? Thank you very much.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So Onika from ESCOM, I think I'm going to give you an opportunity to possibly provide a response, and then I can hand over to Dr. Crispin Alva. Can you take over from there, Crispin, please?
Thank you. Simpiwe, can you hear me? Yes, I would like to, I think, respond to, as you said earlier on, some of the comments that have been put forward. I think I'll just maybe, in the interest of time, touch on one or two before I come to the latest question. And it's relating to, I think, one of the attendees posted a proposal which is in line with our recommendation around IBT, but saying that why can't the free block be free for everybody? And I think I just want to obviously comment on that. And the problem with that is exactly what we have alluded to say, if we don't have a proper criteria to correctly identify the indigents, and this is something that my SALGA colleague also spoken to, then we are back to creating this whole issue of the inclining block tariff, which it will end up subsidizing the rich communities. So it cannot just be based on the fact that for the low consumption, let's give everybody a free allocation. So I think it's just important to clarify that we are advocating for that, but it needs to be based on a proper allocation and obviously to the correct recipients. And I think there was just one question also around the discrepancies between the rate that ESCOM pays, the municipalities, pay to ESCOM, and the rate that the National Treasury itself is providing as the allocation for this free basic electricity. I think that question in terms of how can we address this discrepancy aligns with one of our recommendations to say that we've identified that the indigent communities in the ESCOM supplied areas are disadvantaged, and they are not consistently getting this subsidy of FBE. And therefore, if we are engaging with the various government departments to say, is it not possible that we get this ring-fenced and the subsidy be paid directly to ESCOM so that the indigent communities within ESCOM supplied areas can also receive their allocated amounts of free basic electricity. Then coming to, I think, responding to the issue of the process in terms of the annual revenue determination. ESCOM, there is actually a public participation process. It's done by the regulator. It's embedded in the whole process of the MYPD when ESCOM applies, because as ESCOM, they will determine what is the total cost and apply for the revenue to the regulator. The regulator then, obviously through that process, the various communities and stakeholders can participate in that process. So there is a public participation program in our annual revenue determination. Thank you, Chair. I will leave it there, but I do appreciate, and there are profound comments as well as support for some of the recommendations that we have made. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Onika. So in closing, and I'm going to ask the colleagues that I'm going to ask to speak now to really be mindful of time and just be really brief and straight to the point. Maybe like just get to the point of what you're trying to say. And so I'm gonna just, Louise, can you please, because your hand is up, Louise is one of our commissioners at the PCC, so you may have a comment. And there were other comments. There are other hands that are raised from the stakeholders. It's Moabelo, St. Appleton, as well as Mzwandile. I am gonna make sure that the colleagues who have actually had their hands raised and have not had a chance to speak actually speak. So we'll actually go in that order before we close up.
Thanks, Simpiwe. Do you want me to come in?
Yes, please do.
So, colleagues, thank you very much for the engagement on this platform. And one idea I want to raise is all these companies, so
NetBank online banking session will time out in 2 minutes.
Sorry.
47 seconds.
Obviously we have to have cross-subsidization for the free basic electricity from some or other source. And I was wondering that the companies who are applying to put up their own renewable energy installations or other kind of power plants, should there not be, part of the permit conditions, perhaps could be some measure of tithe or payment to cross-subsidize the electricity. And then I just want to say, I also disagree strongly with the idea that a city should be run like a business. A business, legitimately so, is designed to create profit, whereas government at all 3 tiers is designed to manage and facilitate the economy and deliver social good to our residents in South Africa. And those are quite different missions. I think that if people mean that cities should be run professionally, there shouldn't be fruitless and wasteful expenditure. There needs to be people work hard, they come to work on time, and they work, that is a different statement I would thoroughly endorse. But yeah, the 2 missions are different. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Moabel and Zimande, can you please, thanks Louise, speak and please be mindful of time.
I thought it was going to be me, St. Appleton.
You can go ahead, St. Appleton.
Thanks, ma'am. Yes, we are coming from Food Energy Water South Africa Tertiary Cooperative. We represent community members through secondary cooperatives provincially. And then what we have seen is that energy cannot be separated from food production, food processing, as well as food waste. Hence, we have coined the term catfish-wise, whereby we are looking into cooperatives, aquaculture, training farming, integrating solar to hydrogen in waste to industrial sustainable energies. So we have been talking to governments and various stakeholders in accommodating cooperatives in implementing the solution that we are bringing forward. So we were just requesting, we have as well spoken to Mayor Louise Naude, who took our email. We have tried emailing her, but we haven't had any success of response from her looking at cooperatives, because now when you're talking cooperatives, we are talking about in mass poverty alleviation, looking at a country like South Africa, whereby now we are talking stunting, we are talking poverty, we are talking, lack of energy and all that. And that all those can be solved through cooperatives. And then we were requesting humbly so to look as to how we can partner with your likes, and as well as WWF from Ms. Naude, to see as to how we can help our communities going forward. I thank you.
Okay, thank you, St. Appleton. So, colleagues, Moabelo and Mzwandile have had their hands up. Can I ask that you you pose your comments really quickly. And to the rest of the colleagues, we do have an email address, the mitigation@climatecommission.org.za, and you may pose any further questions there. Thanks.
Yes, it's Mzondi Lemene speaking. Can you hear me? All right. Yes, I'm from the Francis Bar district, so Blackie municipality. The questions that we need clarity on regarding PCC's intention is the ability for the youth to form part of this energy generation PCC to supply energy to the community, because we do have sunlight throughout the year, and therefore areas around the municipality are privately owned by farms. And therefore, I don't know if there is any relationship with the Presidential Commission, with the Department of Forestry, or any department that deals with land acquisition and making it available for such interventions to ensure that the poor communities are provided access to the grid via the generated power that is coming from these small energy producers. And the second one is regarding the application that ESCOM does to get bailouts. Isn't it fair that when ESCOM gets bailouts, it also considers giving municipalities that are indebted a bit of a discount on the debts that have been accumulated by municipalities? Some, like us, energies have been stolen by residents, and sometimes it's difficult to identify these people who are transgressing the energy grid. And therefore, wanted just to know that is then no fair way to ensure that municipalities also, when ESCOM is given these bailouts, they also consider giving municipalities discounts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moabelo, you may go next. So we will compile all this, the conversation to a briefing note, and the questions that we have not responded to here, we will make sure that we do respond to. Moabelo, can you please raise your question?
Good day, speaking to Moabelo Nzimande, founder of African Make. I hail from Tembisa. My question is around the funding of the just energy transition. Looking at the focus of the G7 countries is around the war in Ukraine, and also to note that France, President Macron will not be going for elections for the next election campaign. So I'm concerned around us getting the funding we've been asking for, but not getting as yet, only being promised. I'm also wanting to know if is there a strategy that we can ask BRICS countries to also be involved in funding the South African just renewable energy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Your question is noted, Moabelo. And with that said, thank you to everyone that is still on the call. Apologies. We have gone over time, and I would also like to express thank you to Commissioner Makoma Lekalakala, who is my co-pilot today. And I will then hand over to Dr. Crispin Olva, who's the ED of the PCC, for closing remarks. Thanks.
Good, thank you, Simpiwe. And let me also echo the thanks to all of our speakers, to our commissioners that joined us, to Makoma for facilitating, and to all of the participants who I think have made this an extremely rich discussion. And I'm not going to summarize everything, but maybe a few headline takeaway issues. The one thing that we are all agreed on is the importance of energy and energy access for development, And, you know, people have talked, I think, with a lot of conviction around its role, for instance, in food security, housing, warmth, lighting for kids who are studying, and its contribution to economic activity. So it's not just a net sum game, a zero sum game. I mean, if we're extending energy access, we're also, as Geraldine pointed out in the chat, enlarging the tax base. And I'm reminded of the energy trilemma that the World Energy Council advocates, and which we used as the foundation for thinking through our recommendations on the electricity. And, you know, the energy trilemma is built on these three prongs of energy security, energy equity, which is all about access and affordability, and then sustainability and the move to low carbon energy systems. And, you know, I think there've been very convincing arguments put forward around a minimum consumption threshold of 350 kilowatt hours per month. But equally, you know, I think the input from Madijeng and the perspective from National Treasury highlights the kind of problems that we face in providing that minimum threshold. And foremost amongst that is that our current subsidy mechanism, you know, which is meant to ensure 50 kilowatts per month, isn't getting to the people that need to get it. And there are various leakages out of the system, including, you know, municipal inefficiency, but also consumers, you know, some of whom can afford to pay and who are not paying. So I was very struck by these sort of interlocking systems. You know, the national budget, and as we all know, it's highly constrained at the moment. Its ability to increase any kinds of subsidy allocations are limited. We've got the national energy utility, ESCOM, which argues convincingly that they're not being able to adequately recover their costs at the moment. So they want cost-reflective tariffs. You've got municipalities, which themselves are facing you know, fiscal pressures. They've argued that their services are underfunded in terms of the local government revenue model. And then you've got households, and this very large proportion of poor, unemployed households who are simply unable to afford the 350 kilowatt hours per month that they need for energy. So for me, the sort of common thread that weaves through everything we've been talking about is the need for a national pricing review. You know, the ESCOM input, I think I found very useful. I mean, in the call for a national subsidy framework, and taking an aggregate view, not just of the free basic electricity, but all of the other subsidy mechanisms that we've got in play, like these, you know, zero connection fees, the inclining block tariff, the home light tariff, and of course, FBE. And I think we need to look at the overall financial sustainability of the system and how we can ensure fair, but clearly ring-fenced and disaggregated pricing, so we can see how each of the units, and I agree with Louise, it's not about making municipalities run as businesses, but we do want proper fiscal accountability in the system so we can see how the system finances itself and how it interacts with the other parts of the system. So to me, that's the core recommendation coming out of this. We need a proper pricing review. We need to look at the whole system and the subsidy mechanisms within that and come up with a national subsidy framework. So on that note, well done to everyone for their inputs. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you, Simpiwe, for so ably steering us through this discussion. And we look forward to further engagements.
Thank you, Dr. Crispin. This is a continuing discussion. It's not the end of it, and I would love you to also, if you feel that there are inputs that have or contributions that have not been made, there's an email address that Simpiwe had shared, mitigation@climatecommission.co.za, that people can be able to continue making contributions on the subject. But this is the first of a series of discussions, so this continues. I'll give over to Simpiwe again to do the total closing. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. That's it. Thanks for your time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Makoma. Thanks.